Just want to let you know that we are now recording. And just a reminder to our participants who are joining, we will be recording and taking photographs during this event. By continuing to participate in the session, you consent to being filmed and photographed. These videos and images at which you appear may be used for the benefit of official communication documents and other publications. And of course, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's now exactly 1 o'clock. We'll give ourselves about 2 minutes time for other people to join the webinar. Thank you.
Good morning, all. Good afternoon, all.
Afternoon, Phil.
Nico, I believe you're muted.
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry for that. Yeah, I'm Nico Ace. I'm at this stage at Supra, radiation control in the subunit of radionuclides, working as a scientist. And I really want to welcome everybody that will participate this afternoon in this webinar. Thank you for your time that you set apart for attending this. I really appreciate it, and I hope and I believe that it will be a fruitful exercise, and everybody will learn from it. It is from the radionuclides subunit, the second webinar that we present. So we are also learning as we go on, and but I'm sure that we will discuss technical issues with you, and I hope we enjoy the afternoon. I will really want to welcome the colleagues from Oak Ridge National Laboratory from America, and also the people from the Office of Radiological Security. From our side, I will appreciate if you can also, after we finish with this, introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit more about your organization and where you fit in. And yeah, I especially want to welcome Katie Larson from ORS, and I want to hand over to her now for some comments and remarks from our side. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Nico. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. My name is Katie Larson, and I work for the Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration's Office of Radiological Security. I want to thank, first of all, our colleagues at Oak Ridge and at Supra for putting on this event, and I'm very much looking forward to an engaging discussion over the next several hours. And again, thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. I think we've got a lot of good material for you all, and I'm very much looking forward to our engaging conversations. Thank you so much. I would like to pass the floor over now to my colleague, Chris Mitchell, to talk about some technical introductions. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Allow me to share my screen just so we can talk about a couple of the resources that we'll be using in today's session. And on your screen now, you should see what looks like a diagram, probably similar to the toolbar at the top of your screen right now in Teams. We have this numbered 1 through 6, and a few of these will be more important than others, of course. Let me start, though, on the far right with numbers 5 and 6. That, of course, is our option to turn on a camera and also to turn on a microphone. If you have a question or would like to make a comment, we'd love to see you today. So if you are willing and able and can turn on a camera for us, by all means, please do that. And of course, that's the number 5 there. For the microphone option, we, again, would love to hear from you. Please, though, during the session, if you could, make sure that you remain on mute while the presenters are discussing the slides. That'll help us quite a bit. So we want to make sure that we do not restrict you from being able to use that microphone. So just please be helpful for us and remain on mute unless you have a question or a comment. So let's look now at numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Of course, if you press that number 1, that chat option, that's going to open a chat box where you can ask questions, make comments, say hello if you wish. That's what, we're more than happy to hear from you that way as well. If you press the number 2, you'll get to see the list of participants in our session. But then we get to numbers 3 and 4, and I think those can be very helpful as well for a virtual session. Number 3, if you would like to raise your hand, press that button for us, and that will alert our presenters that we have either a question or a comment, and that will place you near the top of the participant list. If you need to lower that hand, you'll just press that button a second time. And of course, our last button here that we'd like to talk about is our reactions button. Being in a virtual session, of course, it's difficult to maybe express some of our emotions, but that reaction button actually allows us to do that a little bit. So you're welcome to press a smiling face. You can press a heart button, anything that you'd like to express feelings or thoughts about, if that is something that is of interest to you. So those are some of the tools that we have available to us in today's session, and that's really what we wanted to talk about. So Karen, passing it back.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to my U.S. colleagues. I'm Karen Caldenbach. I have the privilege of supporting Miss Katie Larson and the Office of Radiological Security as the transportation lead for the Middle East North Africa region. And yes, in our books, South Africa falls into that MENA region, and I'm very glad they do because it gives me the opportunity to work with each of you. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules today to join us. Thank you to Nico and to Toli for coordinating this event, and Supra as a whole, who are excellent partners. I have had the privilege of traveling to South Africa about a dozen times in the past decade. It's one of my favorite countries in the world. As much as you have beautiful animals and scenery and resources, the biggest asset there are the people. You guys are amazing and have so much heart and energy, and I just love the opportunity to work with you. Mr. Duhamel and I supported a transportation security engagement in August of 2022. I may have had the chance to meet a few of you, and I'm excited to talk to you today about the very important topic of security of Category 2 sources in transport. We're going to share an example of a failure we had in the United States. It's dealing with equipment containing radioactive material that is transported frequently, and it talks about insider threats. And this is a topic that we all have the potential to become an insider threat. We hope we never do, but it's something that is a possibility, not just maliciously, but unintentionally, because we're all humans, we make mistakes, we have failures. So we're going to address that during this afternoon session. And I'm privileged to have two of my esteemed colleagues, Mr. Dave Duhamel and Mr. Bradley Lofton with me today, and I will ask each of them to introduce themselves, please. Dave?
Well, good afternoon. It's can everyone hear me? Karen, can you hear me? Great. Okay. Good afternoon. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to be a part of this engagement. As Karen mentioned, I'm looking very much forward. I always like talking about real world cases because I think it speaks to what we encounter in the real practice of our jobs and in our functions and roles. So I'm looking forward to that. Just a little bit about myself for those that have not met me. I've been in the nuclear security field for the last 20 years, first as a federal agent with the Department of Energy, escorting high consequence materials. And then for the last 12 years, working at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, doing international engagements in the realm of nuclear and radioactive materials. I have spent a substantial amount of time working with the IEA, both as a consultant on consultancies, as well as working as the director for a short period of time on transport security in the nuclear security division. So again, I look forward to sharing these experiences and talking about the challenges that we're faced with, especially in the commercial space, where we find these category 2 and 3 materials and radiography devices. So, Karen?
Thank you, Dave. Bradley?
Good afternoon. As Karen said, I'm Bradley Lofton, and it's my pleasure to be here today to be a part of this engagement. We are, again, as Karen said, we're very happy to be able to present to you and tell you all a little bit about this case study that we that we'll be discussing. A little bit about myself. I have been in the nuclear industry for a little over 22.5 years now, so almost 23 years. And I began my career at the Savannah River site here in the with the Department of Energy in the U.S. Started out in the nuclear world, transporting plutonium, and have since moved over into the transportation security world. For the past 3 years now, have been doing very similar work to what Dave mentioned with international engagements, and as well as supporting ORS for their various trainings. And I am, again, very excited for today and looking forward to some lively discussion. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Bradley. And we also have Mr. Richie Spangler from Sandia National Laboratories with us. Richie?
Good morning, everybody. Or good afternoon, good evening, good day. I guess I should just say good day. That's all it is. Thank you, Karen, for the introduction. My name is Richie Spangler. I do work at Sandia National Laboratories in the Office of Radiological Security Program. I serve as Katie's implementation lead for the MENA portfolio, including South Africa. So I have the privilege of working with our colleagues, both at the regulatory agency as well as with the individual sites there in South Africa to enhance radiological security. I've met a few of you, I think, during either in-person or virtual area when we met there in Pretoria, and then we've also done a few engagements down in Cape Town. But I look forward to the opportunity to meet you again in the future. We're going to be visiting and trying to work with some of your colleagues and yourselves to better secure the radiological material in South Africa. A moment about my background: I've been working in this program, partnering with facilities and regulators for it'll be 10 years in April, I guess, in the ORS program. I've been at Sandia for 20 years next month, and prior to doing my position at Sandia, immediately prior to working here in the ORS, actually was as the transportation manager for the laboratory. So I was responsible for shipments of both domestically and internationally of all 9 classes of material, including class 7 materials. And prior to that, I worked on a variety of other projects, including a number of Type B cask safety analysis reports and trainings for use of Type B casks for the WIP site. So I've been working in transport for quite some time. My focus is now on fixed facilities. We have our colleagues at Oak Ridge National Labs who bring a ton of experience to the table when it comes to transport and transport security. I just barely scratched the surface compared to them. So, but I appreciate the opportunity to participate and offer what I might be able to. So, thank you very much. And I think Mike Itamura from Sandia National Labs is also on the line. Karen, I don't know if you noticed that. If you want to give him a moment to say hi.
Of course, please, Mike, go right ahead.
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Itamura. I work at Sandia National Labs with Richie Spangler. So, and it's good to see all of you virtually this afternoon. I have worked on the program for 16 years, since 2007. And I've been to, I think the first time I went to South Africa is maybe around 2009. So I have a fairly long relationship working on behalf of the U.S. With the South Africans. So it's good to see everyone, and I look forward to a productive engagement.
Thank you, Mike. And we're hoping to meet each of you. For those who can turn on your microphone and/or camera, we would ask if you can please introduce yourself, tell us your name, for what organization you work, and what your role is related to transporting radioactive material. And I would ask if Nico, if you would facilitate introductions in the order, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Yes, so quick introduction from yourselves. Bertus now.
Good morning or afternoon, guys. Yes, I am Bertus Nel. I'm the RPO for DECRA Industrial South Africa, and I'm currently situated in Middelburg and in Mpumalanga.
Thank you, Bertus. Ditole.
Thank you, Nico. I have a challenge with my camera, but anyway, my name is Ditole Sepamora. I work for Supra under radionuclides as a technical reviewer. Thank you.
Thank you. The person from GAMEX.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Grant Peterson. I'm the managing member from GAMEX. We're a non-destructive testing examination service provider here in South Africa, based in Gauteng, in Elandsfontein.
Thank you. Garth Apple.
Good day, everybody. My name is Garth Apple, and I represent the professional body for non-destructive testing in South Africa.
Thank you, Garth. Aline. Day. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce Karelmans. Sorry. You're muted.
There we are. Good day, everybody.
Yeah, there you are.
Yes, I'm a registered pharmacist. I've been in the industry for more than 40 years. For the last 22 years, I've been actually consulting in compliance, GMP, quality management systems. I have at the moment quite a few clients that all work with nuclear and isotopes. And when I actually saw this coming up, I wasn't sure whether it would be appropriate to me, but I was very interested to see whether I could learn something out of your experiences. Since I got him on GMP, I found just the destruction and the handling of those materials very interesting. And also I just felt I need to know if and is there anything that I can actually use when I'm guiding actually my clients. That makes sense.
How do we pronounce your name?
Herlinde.
Herlinde.
Yeah.
Thanks
And
a
now
lot
that's
for
my
your
Christian
introduction.
name. Okay, thanks very much. I put myself
Thank
on
you.
mute and switch my cam, but I'm not a ghost. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Enoch?
Greetings, everyone. My name is Enoch Ndoweni, and I'm an X-ray inspector working with Supra based in Cape Town. Thank you so much for this session.
Thank you. Michael? Itamura?
I introduced myself earlier.
Sorry, Michael. Johan from Emmanuel? Johan from Emmanuel NDT? Okay.
Hallo?
Thank you, Johan. You can talk, Johan.
Hoi, ek is Johan van Emmanuel. Ek is nou op die oomblik hulle RPO en ons is nou situated in van 'n boupark.
Dankie, Johan. Welkom. Karen, Leslie, okay, Lofty, Melanie?
Hi, colleagues. My name is Melanie Govindasamy. I'm from Supra and I'm from the communications unit. I'm really going to be observing and getting more information about this case study.
Thank you, Melanie. Mercy?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mercy Nawa. I'm working for Supra at the Pretoria office under radionuclides as a radiation scientist. It's nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mercy. Malatudi?
Hello, everyone. My name is Moladudi Kwena. I work for Supra under radionuclide subunit in the Pretoria. So nice meeting everyone. Hope it will be a great day. Thanks.
Thank you, Mkondisi.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Mkondisi Mapope, and I work for Supra as the Deputy Manager for licensing of electronic devices that are producing ionizing radiation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nkondisi. Is there somebody that I left out that want to introduce himself?
Good afternoon. I'm Esther Matabani, Inspectorate at Supra. Thank you.
Hi, Esther. Welcome to you.
Good afternoon. I'm Penyu Diale from Supra radionuclides unit. Thank you.
Thank you, Penyu. Hi, Phil.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pumzile Matlala. I'm an inspector in radionuclides and X-rays. Working at Supra in the Pretoria office. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Good day, everyone. I'm Phil Kilfoyle. I work for Gammatic NDT Supplies. We're a supplier of NDT equipment and radioactive sources. Up until recently, I was Radiation Protection Officer, but now moved to the Research and Development Division.
Thank you, Phil. Siyabonga?
Good day, everyone. Siyabonga Kumalo, DTEC Unit Inspection. I'm a company radiation protection officer. We deal with industrial radiography using radionuclides and X-ray machine. Thank you.
Thank you, Siyabonga. Anybody else?
Hello, it's Garth Apple again. Sorry, I know they were looking for photographs, and I don't.
Good day, all. This is Roberto Cano from Oka Entity Solution. I'm the technical manager in the RPO.
Thank you, Garth. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, I think what we must do now is we must switch on our camera, all of us. They want to take a group photo. So if we all switch on our cameras, they will take a group photo of us. You're beautiful.
Hi there, everyone. This is Chris again. We're just going to allow just a few more seconds for our individuals to turn on cameras. I see a few more popping on here. And we'll do this just as you might any type of portrait. I'm going to give you a countdown. I'll take a couple of photographs. That way you can keep your eyes open. Hopefully you won't have anybody with their eyes closed during the picture. You know how that happens sometimes. But see, all of our cameras, I believe, are on now. If you're ready, let's hold that pose. We'll go 3, 2, and 1. Hold that pose. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Chris. Karen, I'm not sure if there's anything else that you want to say now.
I wanted to thank everyone for introducing yourself, turning on the cameras, and this is such a great group and mixture of roles and responsibilities, each one being very important, and we're excited to have this conversation today. I'm going to turn the program over to my colleague, Mr. Dave Dutamel, who's going to tell you about a case study we had in the U.S. Oh, I'm sorry, Nico, you're going to go first. My apologies.
Yes.
But I wanted to thank everybody for contributing, and we hope this will be an open discussion between us all today. So Nico, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Johan, I'll appreciate if you can switch off your camera.
No.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you. Johan, you on again? Can you see my screen?
We can.
Yes.
You can see my screen.
Yes.
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
thank you. Okay, again, we are from Supra, the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. Please take note that originally radiation control was part of the Department of Health, but now we are part of a newly established regulator, Supra, and I will, for the people from the industry, you must please take note of that and update your documents accordingly to make sure that it refers to Supra and not to DOH anymore. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at the security of Category 2 sources in transport in South Africa. In my overview, I just want to say that we're first going to look at the organizational structure, and then we're going to look at the scope of the work that we do at radionuclides, and then we'll have a look at the legislation. So if you look at radiation control, it contains 4 sections or subunits. The first is the electronic generations or generators of ionizing radiation, that is X-rays. the radionuclide subunit, the inspectorate, and non-ionizing radiation and electromedical devices. That's lasers and MR and so on. So the industry, are involved in the X-rays as well as the radionuclides, and hopefully you are also involved in the inspectorate. They will know you and hopefully they will visit you on a regular basis. If we look at the map of South Africa, you will see that initially the radiation controls head office was in Cape Town. It moved about 2 years ago to Gauteng in Pretoria. But some of our people of radionuclides is still working in our office in Cape Town. For the purpose of the inspections, the South Africa is divided into 3 regions: the Northern Cape and Western Cape region with the satellite office in Cape Town, and then we have the Free State and KwaZulu-Natal and the part of Eastern Cape with the office in Durban, and then we have Gauteng. That's the largest region. I can just maybe mention that we have in Cape Town 2 inspectors, and in Durban there's also 2, and there's 5 inspectors in Gauteng, in Pretoria office. So it's a lot of work to be done by a few inspectors. So we really appreciate the work that they are doing in this field. So what we do in the radionuclide subunit is that we have authority holders that possess and use radioactive sources. About 2,500 authority holders, and that is plus minus 15,000 radioactive sources that we regulate. If we look at the authority holders, we have medical applications of authority holders. That is approximately 10% of the total authority holders is for medical applications. We have typically the applications in nuclear medicine and radiation oncology. That is for diagnostic purposes and also for the treatment of cancer patients. That is for radiation oncology. And then we have medical tertiary training centers and also smaller applications like pathology labs and so on. That is the medical applications. If we look at industrial applications, we have 2 major manufacturers of radionuclides in South Africa that export sources to approximately 50 international countries. Then we have 35 distributors that distribute sources inside South Africa and also to major neighboring countries. We have also authority holders that works with irradiators. Typically application for that is for industrial radiators where they radiate food samples and also blood samples, and these are mainly fixed sources. Then we have industrial radiography, where you are all involved in, where we have portable sources. Now, at this stage, we have 89 authority holders in South Africa that works with these sources, and typically the authority holders will have like 1 or 2 projectors and up to 50 projectors at a time, where they use it as for industrial radiography purposes. Then we also have industrial boro logging sources that they use to use in the industry, mining industry. We also have measure and control devices used in a wide range of industries, where they use it as density level soil gauges or thickness gauges. So if we measure, say for instance, the levels on the Coke bottles, they use also radioactive sources to measure the levels to make sure that it is filled to capacity or to the required level. If we use the thickness gauges, they are measuring the thickness of papers and toilet papers and tissues and so on. So that is applications for measuring and control devices. Then we have applications in research and education and training institutions, universities, and then we have various smaller applications where they use analyzers and scintillation counters and smoke detectors, etc. And then we also regulate the transport authority holders. That is companies that specialize in the transport of radioactive sources. You know that if you look at the industry for industrial radiography, where you use movable sources, the authority that you have is not only possess and use authority, but you also have a convey authority, meaning that you are authorized to convey these sources between different sites. So we're talking about category 2 sources in this webinar. So the security or the hazard rating for sealed radioactive sources are categorized in 5 categories, where category 1 source is the most hazardous and needs therefore rigorous security protocols. And category 5 sources is the least hazardous and it needs a minimum level of security. So that is where we fit in category 2 sources. So they are definitely, there's a need for security protocols that must be in place when we handle these type of sources. So the transport of category 2 sources is mainly, as I said, for iridium-192 in the application for industrial radiography. The transport takes mainly place during the import and export of these sources. It is a bulk exportation or the bulk transport of these sources for export to different countries, where Gamatec export in more than one source in a container to different countries, and there's transport arrangements that must be in place between their premises and the airport, and also we have the exportation of contracts in neighboring countries where these sources move, say for instance from South Africa to Namibia, and obviously they must comply with the regulations in South Africa, but also then to comply with the regulation in the neighboring countries. Obviously we have the transport to and from construction sites, where this transport arrangements must also be in place. Just a little bit of hijacking statistics or carjacking statistics for 2022. In South Africa, there was 23,000 incidents where cars were hijacked in the year. That's roughly 63 per day, or 38 per 100,000 people. If you look at the situation in America, there was in the same year about 35,000 in that year, and that is roughly 10 incidents per 100,000 people. So it gives you an indication for what is happening in South Africa. It's a major problem in South Africa, where we have a lot of these carjackings or hijackings where cars are involved. And there's possibility that sources may be in this cars, and that is something that we must secure as much as possible. So just to indicate what is the difference between radiation safety and radiation security. So we have the protection, radiation safety is the protection of personnel or the public and the environment against harmful effects of ionizing radiation. Where the radiation security is the measures to prevent unauthorized access or damage to or loss or theft or unauthorized transfer of radioactive sources. So if you look at the legislation that we use to regulate these sources, first is the Hazardous Substances Act 15 of 1973, and then regulations 246 and 247 related to Group 4 hazardous substances. In this act, as well as the regulations that govern our operations in radiation control, there's no mentioning of security in those documents. Then we also have conditions associated with the authorities that we issue, and in the conditions there is a referral to security. So if you look at the regulations, the only thing that we can say mention something about the security is they say that transport needs to be authorized. So I just want to mention it that a lot of the measures that we put in place to make a source safe for the public and for the operator, a lot of those measures will also influence the security aspects of the source. So by making sure that transport are authorized will not only have an influence on the safety of the sources, but also on the security. So please take that into account. Then if you look at also the regulations, it talks about the convey and cost to convey of these sources. If we see on our authorities, you will also notice that there's an indication on your authority that it is also covering the convey of sources. That is if you yourself transport the sources from one place to another. A cost to convey means that you are entitled to make use of another authority holder that have an authority to transport these sources. So you can make use of some other company that is also authorized to transport these sources. If we look at the conditions, there's two conditions that plays a role in this. Is condition 48 and 62. Now 48 refers to the IAEA document, the SSR 6, that regulates the safe transport of radioactive material. So in the condition it says that the authority holder must abide to this document. And also 62 say that you must abide to the guidelines on industrial radiography and also on the guideline on safe transport of radioactive material. These documents are mainly documents that was developed with the SSR 6 in mind. So the SSR 6 is the main document that we refer to in our conditions when we talk about the safety of radioactive sources, of the transport of radioactive sources. So if we look at the guideline itself, we see that they talk about, in the guideline itself, it mentions the security measures at storing facilities. So it says that there must be 24-hour security reaction unit in place. It says that 2 layers of barriers must be in place to act as a delay mechanism. So it will give you, therefore, time to react if there's say for instance alarm and there's not a if there is a second barrier in place, it means that you will have time to assess the situation before they actually get to the transgressors get to the sources itself. There must be alarm present. There must be assessment of detection of the security breach. So it means that if there was a security breach, you must be able to assess the situation to see, is it a real event that took place or what is the situation on the ground. And there is also a need for rapid means of communication between the response units and the authority holder itself, or the security company that is responsible for looking after this security of the facility. Obviously, it also mentions that there must be weekly stock takes to check for the if the stock is correct. And then there's also mentioning of the transportation, that there must be continuous surveillance of the vehicle in which the sources are transported. Then it also mentions in the guideline the transport of radioactive sources. Now, again, this is not specific mentioning the security. It is more a reflection on the safety of these sources during transport. But these factors will definitely influence the security of the transport as well. So, for instance, if you must have an enclosed unlockable vehicle, it will definitely make the source more safe for the environment and the public and the operator, but it will also influence the security of the transport. If we have an open vehicle, the transport container must be locked and permanently fixed to the vehicle. There must be a satellite recovery system in place. The vehicle must not be left unattended. So if you're transporting the vehicle on the way to your the plant that you want to go and work with the projector, it is not permitted, therefore, to stop and buy a cool drink or a hamburger if somebody is not present to check the security of the vehicle. Movable transport labels, that is more to do with the safety aspects. Projector must be in the sealed position, is also mentioned in the guideline. Transport labels on projector, it's more safety. Not transported in the passenger's compartment. And then if there's any damage to projectors, the Supra must be notified and a radiation survey must be done to see if there was any contamination of that took place. There must be a log register between the sender and the receiver of the source. This is also to do with safety and security of the movement of the source. And then incidents must be reported to Supra. Just make sure that you take note that there's 2 telephone numbers. That is not DOH telephone numbers, it's the Supra telephone numbers. 021 015 5511 is the one, and the other one is 021 015 5470. These two numbers must be noted in your internal rules where you describe how the incidents will be handled if there's any incident. I thank you.
Thank you, Nico. That was an excellent presentation. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Nico? While everybody's thinking, Nico, I have one if it's okay. And I see Richie's got a hand up too. But I wanted to ask you, how often does SAPRA perform inspections with authority holders of industrial radiography equipment?
They are try their best to do it once a year. So the normal practice is that it will be done once a year.
Thank you very much. Richie, I see you had a hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much. I had put it in the chat. I wasn't sure if I missed it in the presentation as to that guideline that you were referring to. I was just wondering when that was released and whether or not that document is publicly available.
The document is publicly available on our website, but unfortunately it was released a long time ago. So we are busy with the updating of the document as we speak, and a new version will be released very soon.
Okay. Thank you very much. Just appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments for Nico?
Karen, do you have a copy of the presentation? Was that shared with us?
Nico, is it possible for us to get a copy of your presentation?
Yes, I'll share it with you after the webinar.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. All right. Any other questions, comments before we move forward? Well, Nico, thank you very much. I found that extremely enlightening. So we're going to turn, Ditoli, you had a question? Go right ahead.
Sorry, thank you, Karen. Yes, just to make everyone aware that our website it's very much alive and interactive. So the document that Nico was referring to, if we go to our website and radionuclides, radiation control, and then you go to guidelines, you'll see there's an X-ray, there's a radionuclides. Then you will have to click on the radionuclides to access such guideline that Nico referred to.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Ditoli.
Ditoli.
Wonderful. I see we now have another hand raised. Forgive me if I mispronounce. Is it Shibonga?
Yes, that's right. Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Just a quick question for Nico. There was a communication that was shared by Supra earlier on in the year that that covers the professional driving license for dangerous goods. On making sure that everyone is compliant to that, I just wanted to know if there is a deadline that has been shared by Supra in making sure that everyone is compliant to get that dangerous goods licenses for the radiographers.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Shibonga. The fact that you must have a PDP license is not mentioned in our Act or our regulations. So that is governed by the Transport Act in South Africa. So I think what will happen during an inspection is you will be made aware of the fact that it must be in place. But we don't have the authority to enforce that at this stage because it's not within our regulations and the Act. But we will definitely advise because it happens now time and time and again that people were pulled off their vehicles and they were fined because the people don't have PDP licenses.
100%. Thank you, Nico.
Any other questions, comments?
Karen, I just did the quick Google thing and I dropped a link to the archived document in the chat. I'm assuming that's the right one.
Excellent. And that speaks to a
Yes.
well-organized website.
And the fact that my coffee's actually working.
Thanks, Richie. Any more? Right. Well, Nico, thank you again. That was excellent. We'll turn things over to Dave now, if you're good with that, Dave.
I sure am. Thank you very much, Karen. Appreciate that. And Nico, thank you very much for the overview and with the regulations and the situation in South Africa. I really appreciated, especially your analysis of the carjacking. I think it's important as a security professional where we keep a good situational awareness of what's going on in the space that we operate in. So I appreciate that. So before we get started, what I'd like to do is I'm going to ask my colleague, Chris Mitchell. We're going to take a couple minutes here just to go through a couple of Mentimeter questions. I'm going to ask Chris to go ahead and describe Mentimeter and that process, and then we'll go through the first test question, and then I'll take it over from there if that's okay with you, Chris.
Excellent, Dave. Thank you again, colleagues. Today we'll be using Mentimeter.com. On your screen, you should see a sample question that we would love for you to help us navigate through. We have a couple of ways that you can access this question and provide a response that we will see in real time. First, if you have a mobile device such as a phone or a tablet with you, there's a QR code that you should see near the bottom of your screen. If you have a QR reader installed on that device, you should be able to scan it and it will pop open this first question. And I'm starting to see some individuals already who are joining us. If you see that number at the bottom, that shows us we have 3 participants who are already joined. So if you wish to take that QR code option, you're welcome to do so, and that will get you there pretty quickly. But if you don't have a mobile device, or if it's a little bit difficult for you to do so at the moment, you can also visit this website, menti.com. And once there, you should see an option to enter this code 94881834. And we want to give everyone a moment to have the opportunity to join us and perhaps answer this test question. And so we'll wait here just to allow you to either enter that code at the website if you're on, say, a laptop computer or a desktop. If you can switch over to a browser and enter that, that'll get you there. Or like I mentioned, if you have a phone with a QR reader installed on it, if you open it and click that, again, it turns your phone into it turns that into a camera so that you can actually snap that and it'll take you out onto the web so that you can open that in a browser, I guess I should say. I see we have 11 participants now, Dave, who have joined us, and we haven't even had a chance to discuss some of the answer choices. Do you want to talk to the participants about those options, Dave?
Yeah, so thank you, Chris. This slide is really just intended to get you guys locked onto the Mentimeter platform. We're going to use Mentimeter just as a way of facilitating some discussion and to get your input into some of the topics that we'll be discussing. This is not, while the presentation as a whole is recordable, this is not trackable. This is anonymous. We're not interested in who thinks of what. We're more interested in just your general ideas and thoughts as we go through this exercise. So the question is, what do you think radioactivity is? Does it float like a butterfly, stings like a bee? From a famous boxer in the US, his quote. Is it in bananas? Is it invisible and will kill you? Or has it contributed to the betterment of humankind? So again, this is just a lighthearted question just to kind of get us dialed into the Mentimeter. Really do encourage everybody to participate in this, because this is a great way for us to kind of pose a question and get some inputs from you all. And in addition to Mentimeter, I will be asking questions, and so I would please ask you to feel comfortable to raise your hand and be engaged in this this dialogue. You know, when we do case studies and we do reviews of hypotheticals and have these types of professional conversations, it is not to pinpoint who's the smartest person in the room. Rather, it's really intended for us as professionals in this field to come together and have a meaningful discussion related to the security. And I tell people all the time, one of the reasons I do what I do is because I love my family and I love my friends, right? And people will say, well, what's that got to do with doing this type of work in South Africa? Well, it's because I love my family and my friends, and now that I know people in South Africa, I consider them part of my larger friendship circle, that I'm concerned about your well-being. The other thing too, though, is that, you know, the world is not isolated any longer. So if something happens significantly with radioactive materials, with these sources, it's going to have a reverberation through the entire industry that we operate in. We saw that a little bit with the Fukushima tsunami, where countries after Fukushima happened, they made decisions to reduce, if not get rid of, their nuclear power industry. And that's substantial, because if we're ever going to get to a carbon-free energy complex, we're going to need nuclear. There's just no way around that. So, you know, if we're going to be doing those things necessary to protect our climate and our planet, then part of that is going to be tapping into the nuclear power that is available out there. Now, it may come to us in different forms with the SMRs and advanced nuclear reactors, but we're still going to need that, because we won't be able to achieve that else in any other format. So, all right. So it seems like we have about 14 people on Mentimeter. According to the slide deck, we have about 30 people that are logged on. So I'm hoping that you guys will take the time and participate in it. So now what I'd like to do is go to the next slide, Chris. And what I'd like to do is just kind of get a poll, get an understanding what you all would think, what your perception of what an insider threat. So if you enter, you can type in a single word that would describe that, or a simple phrase that would describe it, and it will show up on the screen. So think about that question. What is your perception of what an insider threat is, or maybe what you feel it is not, or however you want to interpret this? This is not intended to be a scientific survey. I just want to kind of get a feel for what you all think is an insider threat. Is the person that you come home from every night at home and you tell everything that happens in your workplace, is that person insider? Is your administrative system that sits there at the front door and lets people in, buzzes people in, and are they an insider? Is there really a threat to people that work inside the industry? Do you think that an insider threat is a viable threat in your industry? You know, one idea that I think of when I think of an insider threat is complacency, right? So one person put up a careless person. I could see that. An internal weakness, that's a interesting concept. Yeah. Hard to detect. Yes, it is. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And so we'll give you guys, give the participants a couple more minutes to just kind of give us a sense of where you all are looking at insider threat. Is an insider your biggest threat, or do you see in South Africa, do you see the bigger threat maybe externally? Is it a minimal threat to your industry? Do you think that it's maybe not as significant as other challenges or risk presented to your industry? So we're getting some good, possibly an employee, yeah, a disaster in waiting. Yeah, that's a definitely interesting perspective. Load detection. Again, there's some challenges that we as in the industry, our leadership have to deal with.
If I may interject, I was pleased to see the carelessness, a careless person, but also wanted to point out it's not just carelessness, but it's the fact that we're all humans. That's that unintentional insider, that we can become an insider threat through no malicious intent, through fatigue, weakness, misunderstanding, health issues. So I think that's an excellent point.
Okay. Okay, external threat. All right. I again, this is just intended to kind of get a feel, get our minds set on what we're going to be looking at today with this case study. Chris, if you can go ahead with the next slide. And now this particular Mentimeter question is really intended to help me and our other experts kind of get a gauge of where people are in terms of this particular engagement. I know we had introductions earlier. I know we had a consultant. I know we had people in industry. I didn't, I may have missed it, but I did not see anybody from law enforcement. And again, it's just kind of helped me frame our discussions and our conversation. So if you could just pick the role that best fits you in your organization, or if you're representing an organization, again, kind of helps us gauge the conversation for our scenario. Okay, so we have the regulatory body is well represented, and that's a good sign because the regulator has critical information and insider information that can be used. So that's a lot of people look at the regulator and they put them up on a high pedestal, thinking they're from the government, so that there's no risk there. But that's not always the case. So we need to make sure our regulatory staffs understand what insider threat might be, and also have those insider threat mitigation programs. So that's good to see. We have some RPOs probably, some people from operations. So those of you that are actually involved in using the devices or working with your clients to get those services out there. So that's good. And Chris, if you can remind me, do we have one more slide for the beginning?
Yeah, we have 4 to start us out.
Okay.
Including thanks. That introductory.
Okay, thanks. All right. So I think we've hit our number of about 15 or 16. So again, that will help us in our discussions. Next slide then, and the last one before we get into our scenario. does your company have an insider threat mitigation program? So if you're not part of a company or organization, whether it's a regulatory body or whatever organization you represent, do you have an insider threat mitigation program? Okay, so we have an even split between our yeses and our maybes, right? I guess a lot of the maybes might be an understanding of what exactly an insider threat mitigation program might look like, or do they maybe they have a program but it's not well publicized because of security purposes, or maybe their own lack of communication issues. And then we have 4 of our colleagues that they don't seem to have anything in there, and that's it's not unusual. So we'll talk a little bit about that during the course of our scenario. All right, Chris, if you can go ahead, we'll go into the presentation.
Okay, just one moment, please.
Not a problem. So as Chris is pulling that the presentation up, first of all, I just want you to know that I am not going to be reading slides to you. I don't. My style is to have a conversation and a dialogue with you. So we will use the slide deck to kind of guide it, but I want you to feel free to interrupt me. Trust me, I get tired of listening myself. My kids get tired of listening to me, so I'm sure you all might. So if you do, that's fine. You can ask a question. If you want to delve a little deeper into a topic from the case study, we can certainly do that. And so the format we're going to do is we're going to discuss a really significant event that happened in the US that could have been a lot worse than it was, right? And then what we'll do is I'm going to ask, we're going to have some Mentimeter questions again, just to kind of spur some discussion. And then at the conclusion of that, depending on the time, we may get into 1 or 2 hypothetical scenarios and try to have some more discussion on that. Before we get started into the case study, though, I'd like to see who here, and just do it, we'll just do it through a raise of a hand. Maybe I should have made this one of our Mentimeter questions, but just a show of hands. Who thinks that there's a threat to radioactive materials, especially the type of materials that you all are using? Like, do you think it's a real threat? Do you think it's baloney? Do you think, Dave, you're full of it? You're just doing this to have a job? I'd love to understand what you all think. All right, so, okay, we're getting some people that think that it is a threat. And what's interesting is I've been doing this, as I said, for about 12 years, and I've gone all over the world, and different people have a very different perspective on radioactive materials. So I kind of want to just throw that out there. And one of the things that I offer up to you all is the IAEA has been tracking the risk and the threat of radioactive material for quite some time. So in the last 22 years, through their incident and trafficking database that they manage in Vienna, right? There's been a recording of a self-reporting of 623 thefts of radioactive and nuclear materials. Okay, so well, you can say to yourself, 22 years, 623 instances of reported theft. That's pretty high, and I think it is actually. You know, I was kind of taken aback by that number. But then when you start delving a little deeper into this particular into those numbers, what you see is of the 623 items or theft cases, 214 of them happened during transport. Well, you could say, well, that's interesting number, but what does that mean? Well, a little over a third of all those thefts happened during transport. Well, you could tell me, well, Dave, that doesn't seem like a big deal, right? Transport's just one of those common activities associated with the supply chain and nuclear and radioactive material. And I would say absolutely. But when you start doing a little deeper dig into the situation and you think about it, how long is that material kept in the transport phase of operations? Think about that. Not long. So in the life cycle of that material, it may actually be in a transport stage for a very small time of the total life cycle of that particular radioisotope or nuclear material. So when you start thinking that over a third of those thefts happened during transport, it kind of starts framing the challenges that we in the transportation industry have to deal with. The other thing that was of note of the 623 thefts, either both, and this is almost across the board, so both at the fixed site as well as in transport, almost 98% of those thefts involved the materials that we're talking about today, right? So luckily, a very small aspect of this is the higher categories of nuclear and radioactive material, but that almost 98% of the materials that we're talking about are category 2 to 5 of radioactive material. So that's good in one respect, but two, it shows that we have some issues that we need to address for those of us in the industrial complex that are using these lower categories of sources, right? And then of those, of the ones that were lost, we've only recovered, we haven't recovered all of it, right? So we've recovered about somewhere in the neighborhood, depending on the different types of materials, anywhere from 40 to 60% of those materials. And of those that were recovered, most of those were category 2 and 3. Very few of the 4 and 5s were actually recovered. So again, I'm sharing this information just to kind of put things into context for this particular engagement and partnership between my colleagues in South Africa and the U.S. Department of Energy. We do think it's a problem. We do think we need to get more people engaged on helping to deal with this problem. And it really is up to the practitioners, you all in the field, because it doesn't matter how many times I talk or how many countries I go to. At the end of the day, it's all about the folks that are in the industry and that are actually doing the job and getting it done. All right. So just real quick on this particular case study, this case study was derived out of open source material. So all that means is I didn't go and talk to my intelligence experts to get information on this. We've gleaned all the information from open source. So is it possible that there might be some new and corrected information out there that may not be common knowledge? Yes. I think we've done as deep of a dive as we could on this particular case study, but I just want to put that out there. All right, go ahead, Chris. Next slide, please. What I'd like to do now, when I do a case study, and I don't think I mentioned it, but during my introduction, I spent 21 years in the Marine Corps. And so whenever we start off with an operation, we always start with what we call an orientation to the situation. So that's what I'm going to do in the next few slides before we get into the meat of the case. This particular incident happened on the 28th of April in 2019 in a city in the U.S. The 5th largest city in the U.S. is Phoenix, Arizona, right? So it's in the part of our country in what we call the Southwest, a very hot and arid area, but it's also a very populated area in this particular city, right? And so there's a lot of construction, there's a lot of use for these these types of sources. All right, it is close to our southern international border with Mexico as well. So again, it's an area that we have a lot of that we pay a lot of attention to because of its proximity to our neighbors to the south. Next slide, please. Okay, so I said this event started or this event happened on the 28th of April, but it actually started on the 27th, and we'll talk a little bit about that when I get into the meat of it. So just again, you know, don't think that this was just a very short event timeline, and we'll talk a little bit about this. So in the early morning hours of the 28th, so the 28th of April is a Sunday, right? So now we're talking about a weekend event. You can imagine a lot of times people, what they do during the weekends, they go out socializing and enjoying themselves. This particular case involves the theft where an employee of an industrial radiography company went into his place of employment early in the morning, and he stole 3 what we call 880 Delta projectors, right? So there's an example of one. We don't know exactly what the activity levels of the 3 cameras that he stole, but we can tell you that it's anywhere between 80 and 150 curies of iridium-192, and that is based off of when they're fitted with fresh sources. So roughly about 5.5 terabecquerels of iridium-192. Okay. So when we look at this particular case, he stole 3 cameras. You're talking about almost 16.5 terabecquerels if the sources were in these cameras were fresh. So again, they may have been depleted a little bit with the half-life of iridium-192 being 74 days. So we couldn't get the specifics, but again, we had a very significant breach in security, and we treat this as a major issue. The employee in question has no criminal history, wasn't known to law enforcement, had not in the past projected any indications overtly that he was either disgruntled, troubled, or had any desires to steal these cameras or to do harm, right? So his name is Jared Atkins, and so we're going to come to know Jared Atkins. Now, before I go on to my next slide, I just want to describe a little bit. So each of these cameras, right, the iridium-192, the form factor for these are disc or pellets, right? They're double encapsulated in stainless steel, titanium capsules. Not only did he steal the cameras, but he also stole the tools necessary to breach these cameras. So again, that would it sets the table, if you will, of the challenges that we're looking at. I'll pause here and see if anyone has any questions or any thoughts as I laid out the orientation to this event. All right, I'm not seeing any questions or anything, so I'll continue on. Now let's take a little deeper dive into the main perpetrator of the crime that happened. So, Chris, if you would, next slide. And the question asks, who is Jared Atkins, right? So here's a young man. He grew up in an impoverished area of New Mexico. So he grew up in a town called Gallup, New Mexico. He was not, didn't grow up in a very affluent part of town. His ethnicity is he's half Native American and half African American. Okay, so again, he's by relationship, he doesn't belong to one single ethnic group, and so some have opined that he may not have been well received in either one of those groups, so which would have potentially contributed to his psychological makeup. He comes from a family with several siblings. He was very close to his older sister, who was his primary caregiver. Unfortunately, at the age of 11, Jared and his brother found his deceased sister, who had committed suicide. So you have a young man early in life, had a fairly significant and traumatic event that he was involved with, and it clearly affected him in his childhood. Again, not to the point where he was getting in trouble with law enforcement, but clearly he was having some challenges in his family. But Jared was a good guy. He wanted to do something with himself. So he pulled himself up by his bootstraps, and he actually went on to a technical college, and he earned a degree in non-destructive testing and quality control management. I'm sorry, not a degree, but a certificate. So he had the training to do non-destructive testing and got the proper certifications that you would need to operate here in the U.S. He got hired by a company in Phoenix. So Western Technologies was the company that he worked for. And for all intents and purposes, he had been a good employee. He had earned their trust and confidence. He was a law-abiding citizen. So on the face of it, if we're looking at our employees and we look at what is their, how are they doing? Are they troubled? Are they challenged? What's going on in their lives? There was nothing that at this particular point would indicate to us that there was a problem. So that actually kind of sets a scary situation for us. All right. He clearly was well trained in operating these cameras, and he had the means and the tools at his disposal to access the cameras that were stolen. In 2019, he was 25 years old. So kind of give you put him in context of where he is in his life. He's moved on. He's graduated from a certification program, and he's been working at this company for approximately 6 years. So he's built up a good reputation. All right. Now, if we could, next slide, please.
Dave, I do see a message here in the chat. It does mention that some of the colleagues have lost internet connectivity and will reconnect or rejoin once their connectivity is restored. Just wanted to pass that along to you.
Okay. And Nico, if this becomes a significant issue, let me know, and we can take a pause. But at this point, I'm going to continue on if that's okay with you, Nico. Okay, not hearing anything. I'm going to go ahead and continue. And Karen, I'll let you monitor the situation if you would, please. Okay, so here we have, we put a silhouette up there because unfortunately, I can't use a picture that I don't own. So for our case studies, we left a silhouette. But Jared Atkins, 25-year-old young man. I told you that the situation happened in the early mornings of Sunday. Right now, I don't know about you guys, but when I was in my early 20s, I would socialize on the weekends, and usually I would, meet up with my friends and have a good time starting in Saturday, right? And again, I think what we saw or what we've seen with this case is we have this gentleman who started drinking and participating in overindulging in alcohol on Saturday, right? He had gotten into an altercation with his girlfriend, and before the actual event itself, he started texting his other sister that he felt like the world was caving in, that he was drowning, and that he was having some suicidal thoughts. Right, his relationship with his girlfriend wasn't great. His financial situation wasn't great. He was complaining about how he couldn't make payments on his bills, and that he was actually thinking about suicide by cop. So that's a scenario where he was going to put himself in a situation where and try to threaten a police officer to the point where the police officer would draw their weapon and engage him in a fatal manner, right? So now he texts this to his sister. So his sister, we don't have any record that anything was done at that point, but this did happen a few days before the actual event. So what we have is a young man that's in psychological distress, communicating and conveying a problem, having a problem with his girlfriend. The night of the event, the night prior, right, Saturday night, he pulls out a knife on her, threatens her, right, and then he starts having what we would call a psychotic break, right? So he's under the influence. He's communicated a desire to kill himself. He's communicated that he's not happy, and things are quickly going to go downhill for young Mr. Jared Atkins. Next slide, Chris. So now what I'd like to do is kind of get into the chronology of the theft event itself. And so he starts doing things and conveying messages to certain people as this situation develops. The first part of the situation, go ahead, next slide, please. The next part is the initial event, or the initiating event, coming out of the fact that he's been drinking, right? So at 12:45 early Sunday morning, he leaves his apartment. He goes to a gas station, a petrol station, right? And he pulls a knife and stabs and assaults the gas station clerk. They say he did so very calmly. And again, what we start seeing is a gentleman that is going and having a psychotic break induced by his alcohol use, and then also his mental situation. So the clerk is, the police are called, but by the time the police show up, he is already left the scene. So they don't engage. The police officers aren't engaging him at this time, and he gets into his vehicle, which is a Jeep, and he drives to his place of employment. Right. So now we have he's assaulted. He's used deadly threatened force against an unarmed innocent bystander, and now he's moving to his place of employment. Next slide, please. All right, so now it's about almost 35 minutes later. He arrives at about 1:20. Now, this particular employer, Western Technologies, is closed at this time, right? It's not a 24-hour, 7 days a week operation. They are closed on the weekends. He enters into the complex. They got exterior gates to the facility. He's able to enter in with no problem, even though this is a controlled area with limited and restricted access. He's able to access it with no problem whatsoever. He uses his employee code and badge to get in, and he gains access not only to the parking lot, he gets into the building. Into the building, he goes into the depository where the cameras are kept, and he's able to gain full access to those cameras. What we don't know, and what has not been shared in open source reporting, is all the different physical protection measures that would be applied here for this company. Now, we assume that this company was licensed and regulated by the U.S. NRC, which is our regulatory body for radioactive materials, and it requires that these cameras be in a locked area and a controlled environment. All right, so he is able to defeat whatever security measures they've put in place because he's a valued and trusted employee. So he's an insider to the company. He's been vetted, and there's been nothing that would indicate a problem, right? So he bypasses and he steals the 3 cameras from his place of employment. Next slide, please, Chris. All right. So now he's got these 3 devices. Now, part of this story really doesn't make sense, right? And I think that's critical to understand, because what it shows is he wasn't thinking about this. It wasn't a well thought out plan on his part. A lot of this is we're showcasing is a reactionary area. Now, let me ask you this. An employee steals 3 radioactive source cameras in the middle of the night. He's not acting like he's got a plan, but does that matter? What do you guys think? Does it matter that he's not acting intelligently at this point? Is the risk with these 3 particular cameras significant enough, whether the person's showing a well organized or thought out terrorist plan, or just a crazy misguided adventure? What do you guys think? And please don't take offense when I use the term guys. I'm not referring just to our male participants. Maybe I need to be a little more careful, but I'd like to ask all the participants, when you hear this story, like here we have an employee that stole 3 cameras in the middle of the night. Does it matter that he was what his intent was at this point? From the perspective of security, does it matter what his intent is during the actual conduct of the event? I know you all don't want to listen to me the whole hour and a half. So if you have some ideas or thoughts, I'd love to hear it. Yeah, please.
So now it doesn't matter. The one thing that matters is now what next?
That's right. It doesn't matter. And what is next, right? So the challenge is here, right? We had an assault at a gas station. We had a theft at a company that we're not sure how well it was detected and initiated. But now we have someone that's going and he goes to a car dealership, a place where we sell automobiles, and he starts lighting them on fire. I don't know. We don't know why he chose this particular car dealership, and we don't know why he lit the cars on fire. But what this is starting to show, right, is the police, the law enforcement response is responding to, are they responding to a potential weapon of mass destruction? Or are they responding to a bunch of potentially unconnected criminal activities, right? So as a former law enforcement officer myself, what I see is unconnected criminal events. No one at this point, right, has put the assault against the clerk and the arson and the theft together yet. All right. So he drives away from the car dealership. Next slide, please, Chris. Thank you. He drives away, and approximately about an hour and 10 minutes later, he starts communicating via text messages with some people, right? So he calls his girlfriend and his family members. He tells them that he's going to make a last stand, right? So again, he's reinforcing his thought process of suicide. He was thinking about going to one of his coworkers and stealing a firearm that his coworker had. His coworker evidently had some weapons. And then he starts texting his his coworkers themselves. When did the law enforcement find out the cameras were stolen? Well, we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll share a little bit as we go along in this case study, right? But all of a sudden, it's early morning hours on Sunday morning. You start getting texts from one of your colleagues that says that I have snapped and I have 3 sources. Stay home until they are found. So what's that conveying to you all, right? So to me, he's starting to convey not just his intention to do harm with these devices, but that now he has the sources and the capabilities to do a potential weapon of mass destruction, right? So he's conveyed that he's stolen sources and that he's snapped. So he's not of right mind and he's got a psychological problem. One could say, right, that this is the first part of detection, right? So this is the first point where anyone in the industry or anyone associated with Jared Atkins can start seeing that there's a major problem and that he has control over 3 sources. Now, he doesn't communicate where he got the sources or anything like that. But again, because he did this to his colleagues, you can make the supposition that they would have thought that he got access to those sources. All right. So now to your question, right, is when did law enforcement find out about this? This is going to play out and be a significant issue for the company. So next slide, please, Chris. So at 6 a.m., right, we've had the employees are communicating amongst themselves, and a couple have decided that, you know what, we have a serious problem and we're going to have to deal with it. We're going to have to, find out what's going on. Like, did he steal the sources from our company? What's going on with Jared? Right. So the 2 employees go to the facility and they actually verify that the sources have been stolen. Soon after, they communicate to the Phoenix police that they're missing the 3 sources and that they've been stolen by one of their employees. All right. The Phoenix police, once they identify the fact that we're talking about a potential weapon of mass destruction or potential materials that could be used in a weapon of mass destruction, they communicate this to the local branch office of the FBI. So think about this. How long in this case have the materials been missing? 5 hours. 5 hours before people are starting to initiate any type of a response specifically geared towards the radioactive sources. And at this time, right, no one knows where Jared Atkins is. Okay. Next slide, please, Chris. So Sunday morning, Jared drives to a local mall with the intent of spreading the Iridium-192. Now, luckily for us, he really didn't have because he was in what we would probably describe as a mental break. He's not looking to, he wasn't well prepared. So he hadn't thought about any type of an explosive dispersal event or anything, but he was going to start spreading the Iridium-192 sources, right? So as he's heading over to the mall, he's also conflicted and thinking about suicide, right? So he's thinking about opening up the cameras themselves and exposing himself to the sources along the side of the road and die of radiation poisoning. For whatever reason, he actually opens one of the projectors. And as he said, he was going to open all 3 of them and kill himself through radiation poisoning. But he changes his mind. He comes to I don't know, maybe he has a moment of clarity, but he puts the sources back into the camera, and then he drives and barricades himself inside of his apartment. The 3 projectors, so he's inside of his apartment, and the 3 projectors he leaves out in the street, or in his Jeep, in his car, parked out in front of the complex. And now, again, at about 10:30, we start seeing a significant law enforcement response. You got the FBI negotiators out there trying to find out, and they're trying to determine what's going on with the situation. Next slide, please, Chris. So I just want to show you, this is the lay of the land, if you will. Think about all the places. So Mount Ord up in the top right-hand part of the map is where he pulled over and he was going to commit suicide with the radiation poisoning. Changes his mind. Look how far he drives all the way back to his apartment from the time where it initially started. So for the last roughly 10 hours, this is the lay of all, this is where all those cameras were taken and driven about. And again, he barricades himself into his apartment, and they get the FBI, and it takes 2 hours. Next slide, please. It takes 2 hours for the negotiators to convince Jared to come out. Now, it's interesting as a former leader and commander of law enforcement, as well as military personnel. If you think about the overall situation, you had a guy that overindulged in alcohol and possible drug use, which led to a psychotic break, which led to a theft of radioactive sources, right? So now we're the next day, 10.5 hours after the initiation of the events. What do you think's going on right now, right? So what's happening is he's sobering up. He's starting to come to his senses. He's starting to realize that he may not have made some wise decisions, right? So they convince him to surrender himself. He does. The task force that was dealing with this particular situation, they recover the 3 cameras, right? So when they responded to the parking lot or the location of his apartment, through their detection capabilities and their hazardous materials unit, they were able to safely recover those devices. All right, so that's the case. 2 years after the event, he was finally convicted and he was sentenced to 15 years of jail. What that really means is that for 3.5 years, and we need to update the slides. So I think after 3.5 years, we're looking at, this happened in 2019, he may be released from prison already and under what they call supervised release. So again, a young man that was having a psychotic break, that was just, and then made some really poor decisions. But that does not excuse, nor does it minimize the risk that the millions of people in the city of Phoenix were exposed to, right? So next slide, please. Now let's talk a little bit about that. Go ahead with the first bullet. Yeah. So what do you guys think about the response overall? How do you think that response to the situation went? Yeah, Esther, please.
Yep. When I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about the lock and keys at the facility, at the NDT practice.
Yeah.
So if there's an entrance into the facility at that odd time of the evening, so is there no second person who is able to see that there was entry into the facility? Because that should be something that cannot just be one person that can be noted to be entering the facility. There's got to be a second person.
That's a great point, right? That detection could have happened a lot quicker had their system of detection and protection for those cameras was much more effective, right? So why was an employee after hours on a weekend allowed to disarm the security, if it had security, gain access to keys and access the cameras? So I can't speak specifically to Western technologies because, as you can imagine, there's a lot of liability and a lot of information was withheld from the public. But having traveled all around the world and talked to different companies, there are situations where employees are given access to the cameras because they may have to go out for a job on Monday, and it might take them, about a 12-hour drive to get out to the job. So they might leave early in the morning the day prior. So while it's easy to sit back and say, what's this guy doing and why did he have access? I have seen other operations where people may have gained access, but that doesn't excuse the situation. There are better ways of managing access to the cameras, even for employees that have to come in to get materials. What might some of those physical protection measures be? What would some of those operational procedures be that, separate from the alarm system? You mentioned a little bit about it, right, with the keys. What else could the company have done to ensure or prevented this from happening? Yeah, Phil.
Well, there's
Yes.
various things that could have been done. When we talk about layered defense in terms of access to radioactive storage areas and stuff like that. So this guy was obviously given, or had easy access to the radioactive store. There was no, especially since it was after hours, somebody should have known that this event could have happened if he was supposed to go in there and collect a projector or two. The other thing is that there was no early warning system where the radioactive store door is opened and somebody has entered that facility outside of being authorized to do so. So there are things that can be put in place like Bluetooth low energy devices and so on that can track the movement of people or equipment where it is not authorized or they are not authorized to be there at that particular time. Perhaps they may not be authorized to remove a projector from the radioactive store and so on. So there are lots of ways that early warning can be triggered in cases like that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Phil. There's several measures that could have been done, and those would have been they could have been both technical as well as operational. Go ahead, Chris, and just put the rest of the bullets up there. What I want to really talk about too is, so we have the law enforcement response. I just want to put that on the side, at least the radiological response. We'll just get to that in a little bit. What I'd like to talk about is the actions of the employees. What do you think of the fact that they first started getting texts at 3 in the morning by a disgruntled employee? Someone received them, right? And in the course of receiving those texts, that he conveyed to them the loss of, that he had 3 sources, and that he was basically telling them, stay home because I'm going to do something bad. That happened at 3 a.m. in the morning. What time did the employees show up at work to see if those sources were theirs? Do you remember?
A very lethargic 6 o'clock.
Yeah, 6 in the morning. Did they call the police?
No.
What do you think those employees were worried about?
That's
They
a
were
good
worried
question.
about their own safety
Well, their own safety, but what
without
else?
worrying about where these projectors are.
That's right. They were
Their
they were
own personal safety.
And I would also say they were probably just worried about their own careers and jobs. Like they want to know, okay, he stole 3 sources. Did they come from our company? Because that's going to be a big problem for us. Not a single one. So 3 hours went by before police were notified. Yes, Richie, what do you have to say?
I just have a curious question for clarity on this, because he texted them at 3 a.m. and then they didn't go into the office until 6 a.m. on Monday morning.
Not Monday morning, no.
Or Sunday morning?
Sunday morning.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, do you know whether they the records show whether they actually received the text at 3 a.m. when they might have been sleeping and they just didn't see it until 6 a.m. when they woke up, or did they just ignore it when they got it at 3 a.m. having seen it but just deciding to sleep in?
Sure. I can't speak to that because again, a lot of those are great questions to ask, but this is what I would surmise, right? Is someone must have seen this text sometime before 6 a.m. because they were able to communicate and get 2 people, right? So it just wasn't a single employee that showed up on Sunday morning at 6. It was 2 Western Technologies employees that drove to their place of employment. So between 3 and 6, they found the text, or they read the text, and they communicated amongst themselves that they had a problem that they wanted to look into. Yes, Esther.
Yeah, and this also indicates that in their company they don't have these emergency procedures. Like who's the first respondent when things like these happen. You have to have somebody who's the first person to report to. So their emergency procedures were not in place, or they did not use them.
Absolutely right. Like where is the overabundance of caution, right? Like why wouldn't they have just, even if they didn't know he stole it or not, they just got a text at 3 in the morning that says, I have 3 devices. I'm having a mental break. He said that, right? He said and that I have 3 sources and stay home. Why wouldn't you call the police even if you got the message at 5 o'clock in the morning or 5:45? They didn't contact police until after they confirmed the loss of those 3 sources, right? I'm sorry, go ahead, Phil.
I think the whole situation is very fortunate, actually, that he did contact somebody and say that he stole these sources. Because if he hadn't have done so, he could have been, I don't know, he could have been in halfway across the country before anybody realized what had happened. So again, it goes back to how do you track these things once something has actually happened? He could have been anywhere. And, without some kind of tracking device, I know that between Pacific Northwest National Laboratories, ORS, and probably even Oak Ridge, there is a tracking system operational in the States now, if I'm not mistaken. And
it is, but it's not mandated, right? So
that's what I was thinking. Yeah,
we don't have a regulatory requirement that the sources, the individual cameras themselves, have to be tracked by item, by satellite technology or cellular tracking systems. That's not in place. But you're right that we're fortunate because nothing bad happened. But again, as someone who's an expert, well, I shouldn't say I'm an expert, as someone that cares a lot about security and someone that's in the field, we can't count on this happening again. We can't count on good fortune always to keep us safe. My colleague, Bradley mentioned, and I think he was spot on. What do you think the employees were worried about besides their own self? Do you think maybe they were worried about Jared? They didn't want to get him in trouble. Maybe they just thought he was kidding with them, and that's why they went to the facility at 6 a.m. to see if he was kidding. Yeah, Chris.
Hey, Dave, I just noticed we have a couple of questions in the chat as well. So
Okay.
Herlinde asks, what about a mock emergency run? What do you think about that?
Like, do you think, I'm sorry, were you, in the question, are you thinking that maybe this was like a drill of some sort?
Oh,
Like
sorry, let me explain it. You know, basically, if any critical procedure should be followed, isn't it necessary that we do emergency runs in the safe phase in the case when there is a fire or a flood or thing like that? Shouldn't there be a procedure in place with all critical steps that it doesn't matter what it is, but any radiation contamination possibility, basically, that could occur, that such procedures should be thoroughly checked. Actually, we call it effectiveness check. It's one thing to write a procedure how to deal with these things, but the other thing is if you haven't actually challenged it, and we normally challenge it, but we call it a mock. You know, you don't do the real thing, but there is a mock run just to verify that the officers that should take at various steps responsibility handle this. And then obviously there's more than one person that's responsible, so there must be a handover procedure from one responsible person to another. So it's not all falls on one person, because one person taking full responsibility creates another risk. I've seen if you spread it, then you can't blame them. Then you hand over from one to another to the whole process. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail right on the head, right? Is that their operational procedures were weak, that they clearly didn't test their operational procedures to find those weaknesses because, right? And that the employees were not trained or were not of the mindset that something bad could happen.
Vigilant. Yeah, they were not like resilient. They were not alert. They were not. I've got one other thing in some of our South African regulations where we do work with highly regulated substances. Pre-screening of any employee, whether it's the cleaner up to the CEO, has to have the police clearance. Oh, Nico, you can help me on that. But, there must be a police clearance certification, which is verified ad hoc at any random time if felt needed. Plus, and obviously a character screening or, personality that you see, but are people really because here we're talking about some person which I thought the whole looking at the picture that there's nothing wrong with his IQ, but I think his emotional equivalence, his EQ has a weak link, and that thing just needs a trigger. And then he actually runs out of control because you thought he was a good person. He didn't show it. He had weakness in his family, but never once thought that if something is triggered, that it would escalate in what actually happened.
Yeah, I can tell you that. Yep.
Yeah.
I would tell you that in the U.S., background checks are very are typically required for people that are going to be handling the Class 7. If they have a Class 7 commercial driver's license, they have to have a federal, what we call a federal government background check. But again, those once you do a check, it doesn't mean that the person's perfect. It just means at that point in time in their life, they didn't have any findings. So you have to have some form, right? You have to have some way of monitoring these individuals, and that goes to what you were saying, right? Is there's got to be some sort of a monitoring system where managers and other employees can report if they feel concerned, and they got to be able to do it in a way that they won't be punished for it, right? Because sometimes when we see our employees behaving improperly, we don't want to get them in trouble, or we don't want to get we don't want to get in trouble either. We don't want to make them mad at us, and now we have a very
Yeah,
uncomfortable situation.
but if you think if you got just an analyst in a laboratory in our quality system, they have to go for an annual eye test because I mean they have to see look fine detail, and your eyes might have gone dead. You know, some of us get reader glasses after 50 and things like that, and that is part. When you employ them, you say, these are the rules. This is what's going to happen. You know, we have to go for an eye test every year because we rely on you, on your eyes to read, to pick up these things and see clearly and what. So it's same perhaps in that situation. I don't know. Maybe also a nice thought. Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks. Thanks.
I just want to, thank you for
Yes.
that. I just want to offer to Denise, to your question. I don't know what the law is in South Africa. I don't believe that the individual cameras themselves are required to be tracked by satellite. Maybe they are. What I've typically seen is the conveyances that these mobile sources are driven around in have to be tracked by satellite or some other form of geolocating capability. Somebody else can correct me if I speak incorrectly in South Africa. And then the other comment with regards to the company procedures are only as good as the users. It requires enforcement and communication. That's absolutely correct. I couldn't have said it better myself. Operational procedures are only as good as they're as well as they are managed, supervised, and verified by the company. So one of the things, one of the phrases that I used to do, I would say to my junior managers and my junior leaders in the military, right, is inspect what you expect. So if you have standard operating procedures, you have to create an environment where you're checking on those procedures. What you're checking on is not the procedures themselves, right? You're checking on the employees enforcing and performing those procedures in accordance to what is documented and what you've already know to be true and proven. But that also requires that you test your procedures, right? So you actually you spend the time to go through these hypothetical situations or to test your entire system to find out where those weaknesses are. Chris, before we go on, can you go ahead and pull up the first Mentimeter question? I know we're getting close to our end time. I want to try to hit these Mentimeters for discussion purposes, and we're going to go into a little deeper into those topics that you guys described. Yeah, Richie, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question. Are you aware of any satellite tracking technologies that are available for individual cameras right now?
Yeah, so MSTS is.
That's not satellite tracking technology that is used for cameras.
Are they using Bluetooth remote from the vehicle? I thought it was.
It's all tied to the vehicle.
Okay, the only other place I've heard it is the South Koreans have created a add-on device to a well logging camera. The problem is that the package, any type of modifications to the camera needs to be approved by the regulatory body. And last I heard, and this has been a couple of years, so that's the most in depth I have. Yeah, Phil. Phil, did you have a comment or question? I can't hear you. I think you're muted. There you go.
Okay. The South Koreans have a system called a RADLOT, R-A-D-L-O-T.
Yep.
And that is a very active system for tracking individual cameras, as you guys call them. We call them projectors, but anyway, same thing.
Okay.
And their system is very integrated, from highway gantries to gantries at border posts. The system is integrated with their civil defense, police. They even have a control room or a controlling area that tracks the movement of these category 2 sources. Very sophisticated system that they've got there.
Okay. Yeah. So I've not heard. Last I heard of their system, it was being tested and piloted in Vietnam. I think they briefed that back to the IEA back in 2018 at a technical meeting. But I don't know how far it's gone out into industry. I do know the U.S. system that our colleagues at Pacific Northwest Laboratory utilize is that there's a company now that sells it, and it's been and some large oil field companies are utilizing the technology. I was under the impression it was satellite, geolocated using satellite, but again, Richie seems to have better information than I do, so I don't know.
We're aware of a system that's being used in the States now where there is definitely GPS tracking of cameras, along with Bluetooth tracking in and out of the vehicles, etc., etc.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think the system is quite advanced, but as you say, it's not mandatory, and I don't know how widely it's used. We are developing a system like that here in South Africa, and we are actually actively tracking our transport, our multi-channel transport containers, which we send to about 40 different countries.
Right.
Which is, and you know, there's a problem. There's always a challenge in things like this with battery life and stuff like that, because you know you want the thing to keep on reporting if it's been stolen and so on. And so there's definitely sort of challenges to ongoing tracking of devices like these.
Yeah, and I do know that one of the main hurdles is for the manufacturers of these projectors, right? So anytime you do you make any modifications to the original licensed design of the cameras, the projectors, or in the transport of other sources, right? So like your Type B packages, any type of modifications require a recertification in order to authorize the use of that technology with that device to ensure that the integrity of the package is not in any way weakened or minimalized with the add-on. So I do want to say one thing. Somebody wrote in the crime of opportunity, and I would like to offer to you that I would not label this as a crime of opportunity. I would use the term a crime of ineptness, right? That the company failed to do what would be considered minimally appropriate security measures for those cameras. So it was a crime of opportunity based on the failures of that company in protecting those cameras. So setting aside Jared, setting aside all the issues of trying to monitor your employees' mental health, right? At the end of the day, in addition to that problem with Jared and his psychological failures or issues, the company just failed. They failed, and there's just minimal basis of security that would allow a single employee to gain access to the sources at the worst possible way, like in the middle of the night when there's no one around. To me, it's totally a case of malpractice on the part of that company. All right, so next slide, Chris. All right, so given everybody's experience, right? And so I do want to say this, right? It's like, I've only been, I'm just one security practitioner. You all are experts in your respective fields, right? So it's not that I'm any more knowledgeable than other people. I just happen to figure out how to make a business of this. What I would like you to know, what I'd like to kind of gain is from your own experience, from your own background, your own expertise. What do you think of this? Was this preventable? Do you think it was a fluke because this guy had a mental break? Or do you think that this is going to happen again? That, it's just one of those things that we have to deal with? All right, I think we got 14 people online, so if we can get some feedback, that'd be helpful. All right, so we're seeing
Dave, just a reminder to our participants, this one, if you're on Menti, you have some sliders available to you. You want to slide those in the direction that you feel strongest, and you can choose one to slide, or you can slide all three.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. It helps us, it shows a little bit of a ratio. So the only thing I would say here, right, is yeah, sometimes we can put everything in place perfectly, but there's still people that want to do harm and can figure out ways of defeating our measures. So again, that's why we need to have a continuous improvement mindset. And for those of you that have a quality background, if I remember from the introductions, we had several of you that were in the quality field. That's where we need to play. All right. Well, thank you, Chris. This is really good. I'll give you another couple seconds, and then we'll go ahead to the next slide. Okay, next slide, please. And we'll share our responses on this to you all at another, after this event. So this is a question I'm just kind of curious, like, how well do you guys monitor your employees' mental well-being? So I've been involved in what one could say is some of the highest levels of security in my own country. And I've worked with people that have had mental breaks that for a majority of their life, they were very healthy, they were very well oriented, all put together, but all it took was one or two major life events, the loss of a loved one, a financial downturn, or some other major stressor, and it really did impact their ability to do their jobs well and safely. So something to think about, like how well do we look out for each other? And again, I told you at the beginning of this engagement, I do what I do because I love my family, that I know that everything I do external to my family, is intended to prevent something bad from happening in our world. And this is part of it is, when I work with my employees in a high threat, around high threat materials or in a high security environment, if I don't feel comfortable, I've sent people to get drug tested. I've sent people that smelled like they had a hangover to go get a breathalyzer. We established a standard of behavior and a standard of performance that if you couldn't meet it, we were going to monitor that, make sure that you were of right mind. Okay, next slide, please, Chris. Yes, Bradley.
Hey, Dave, I want to add to that last slide. Not only does, the company, if they have a company program, but how open is the environment that you're working in that you feel comfortable, reporting a colleague. I think that's also important to point out that if you see a colleague with trouble, do you take that upon yourself, or do you go to the company to say something, or, how is that, that environment's also quite important for, assessing each other.
I think that's a great point, and that is the culture of the company and how management looks at the situation. Karen, before I get to you, if I could, I just wanted to explain this slide. If you could go ahead, I'm asking everybody to rank these 8 different measures that you could use. If you could just rank them in order that you think are which are most valuable to your organization, your situation, to prevent what was described from happening, I'd appreciate that. All right, Karen, you had something you wanted to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow on to Bradley's excellent comment. Nico brought up about the fact that we benefit from the safety measures that also provide some level of security in a lot of cases. And the same is true when we're talking about the human element of security. the fact that we're not just looking out for security concerns, we're looking out for the health and safety and welfare of those supporting these. And like you said, our families, our friends, making sure that we make a report, even we don't want to get somebody in trouble. We want to make sure that they're not going to get hurt going out on the job in a condition that they may not be able to do that safely and in a secure fashion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. That's a great point.
Hey, David, looks
So-
like we have 6 responses recorded so far. And just for our participants, if you've not seen a question style like this in Mentimeter before, you want to make your first selection, the one that you think is the most effective. And then you'll see a box open beneath that where you can make your second selection. Of course, as you make that second selection, your options start to minimize as you see fewer on the screen. And that'll allow you to navigate from what you think is the most effective to the least effective using that that set of fields in Mentimeter. I do see we have 8 responses now, Dave, and it looks like the majority, we don't want to influence them too much, but it does look like the majority of folks are saying better security awareness so far.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Chris. And I would also like to share that we've, Karen Kallenbach and ORS has done a lot of work in South Africa, as well as other U.S. agencies in the U.S. Government have talked a lot about insider threat issues globally, and have been to South Africa to have workshops. And so there's a greater, if this is something that you feel you want more training on, that's something that we could certainly, working with our colleagues at NNSA, see what we could do to help provide some additional training in these areas. So one of the other big challenges that we have, right, is, and it really wasn't called out necessarily in this particular case study because we didn't know the response mechanisms between law enforcement and the company itself. But we do really encourage close cooperation between private companies such as Western Technologies and reaching out to law enforcement so that they understand their company profile, they understand what they have at their location, at their site, and that if they're calling for a problem involving a camera or involving radioactive material, class 7 materials, that they know it's serious. And Phoenix, the Phoenix Police Department in the U.S. is one of the better ones in regards to working with the Office of Radiological Security and preparing their law enforcement officers to deal with these types of situations. We've been, the Office of Radiological Security has done a lot of work with the local police department there in Phoenix. All right, next slide, Chris. Oh, there we go. We got another movement. All right. I thought we were done. I apologize. All right. So now the question is, how much do you think complacency, right? So complacency would be the lack of concern or the lack of practice of following procedures. How much of that played in response by the company? Yeah. So, throughout the story, we focused on this poor gentleman, Jared Atkins, and we've talked a little bit about the company itself not having the proper security measures. I'm not sure. I mean, I didn't interview any of the company management or employees for this case study, but I'm not sure why things were not done properly in terms of having 2-person control or having key control or having security system or operational procedures. But the one thing I can tell you, and I've seen this a lot in my own professional life, is that when we don't have problems, we think problems don't exist, right? We get very comfortable operating day in and day out if nothing happens, right? Because we're creatures of habit. We like to do things a certain way. We like to minimize disruption in our daily lives. I'll take this example today. I had to drive into my office very early in the morning and I had no rush hour. And I was thinking to myself, what a pleasant way to drive to the work, because there's nothing I hate more than rush hour traffic, right? Because I like things to go a certain way. Now, if I were to put myself in the shoes of a technician, I would say, well, I like being able to go into the office at weird hours in order to get a jump on my day, or to get out to job site without any managers bothering me or any of that, right? That might be a mindset, but that is not a good mindset to have, right? I mean, that is unhealthy. When we start planning for ease of our day-to-day activities over the proper and necessary security measures, we have a culture problem. All right, I just got a signal from my computer that says that we're coming down to the end of this, so I want to go ahead and stop us here. I want to say thank you for your participation. Again, this case study is intended to be an opportunity to look at a real-world situation, but it's not. We don't do this to solve the problem for Jared Atkins and Western Technologies. We do this so that you can look at what happened and then look at your own organization and say, could this happen to me? Could this, if Western Technologies was Dave Duhamel working at Supra, or Dave Duhamel working as a consultant in the industry, or Dave Duhamel working at an industrial radiography company in South Africa, could my employees, if something could Jared be one of my employees? Could one of my employees go in the middle of the night without permission and gain access to my cameras, right? So that's why we look at these case studies, to help us take a real hard look at our own operations and look inwardly to see if we could do things differently and certainly more effectively when it comes to security. And then if the answer to your question is, yeah, that could have happened, then that's where I would challenge you. I'm not asking. I am challenging you guys to look at and do things differently. Take those measures and take those steps necessary to change the way you do it, so we're better off. So, all right, I'm going to at this point turn it over to Karen Kallenbach. I will say thank you. I'm going to go ahead and put my my email address in the chat. So if you guys have any follow-up, you're more than welcome to contact me. And I'll also put my cell phone. And now, Karen, it is all yours.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you to all for the active discussion. And as Dave said, this case study was just an example. We use this, it's a recent one in the US where we had a major failure. But think about all the movement of cameras, all the industrial radiography equipment that moves every single day, and how if we have it in the hands of the wrong people, or when it's not in its most protected state, like it should have been with Western Technologies but wasn't, how vulnerable that can be, and how important it is for us to be attentive to the security of that equipment. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Well, I think we had some very good discussion. We definitely enjoy the opportunity to have conversations with you on this. We're happy to stay on. I know we're 2 minutes away from our end time, so I want to be respectful of that. I see we have a hand raise. Nico, please go right ahead.
Everybody, the internet dropped me, so I was away for most of the presentation. But I really want to thank everybody that was involved in putting up this webinar and arranging it. I really appreciate your assistance, and thank you for everybody that contribute with the discussions and spend the time. I think it was worthwhile spending your afternoon in this way. and hopefully we will do something similar in future. I really thank you for everything. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Nico and Datoli, for organizing this event. Thanks to all for the active discussion and participation. As Dave said, we welcome any follow-on questions, comments. We'll be happy to reach out to you via email. And if there's a desire for additional discussions on any topics of transportation security, please let us know. We're happy to organize events in the future and work with you jointly. Thank you. Datoli, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes. I just want to maybe remind everyone that we have another run of the same webinar on the 5th of September. With a hope that we'll have more of our colleagues joining that, especially those who did not attend or who could not manage to attend this one. So we have planned that at least we can accommodate those who could not attend on the 5th of September. So if you know anyone who this webinar will able to benefit, you are free to share their contact with us so that we can able to send them the invite and able to assess the number that will be willing to attend then, so that we can able to have this again.
Thank you,
Karen.
All right. Any last questions, comments? Please feel free to open your mic, raise your hand. Atoli, did you have another? Or Phil, I'm sorry, Phil.
Just want to say that there's technology out there that can improve the control and security of radioactive devices, and people should think about using it and investigating it more.
Thank you, Phil. Excellent point. And we know that a lot of facilities don't have it in their budget maybe to purchase such technology right away, but there are operational measures that can help accommodate, improve security, and we highly encourage those. Good communication, verification of existing SOPs, maintaining positive control, and working together to ensure that that material stays safe and secure. But thank you. Excellent point, Phil. Any other questions, comments before we dismiss all? Well, I want to thank each and every one of you again. It was our great pleasure to be able to speak with you today. Thank you to Dave, Bradley, Katie, Richie, and all who participated in our discussions for making this engaging. I hope you all have a great day. We'll hang on for just a few minutes in case anybody has any follow-up questions or comments. Have a wonderful